Special Counsel Mueller investigating Trump for possible obstruction of justice. Officials say Mueller shows his hand. He's investigating Trump for obstruction of justice. National Security reports. The move by Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III to investigate Trump's conduct marks a major turning point in the nearly year-old FBI investigation, which until recently was focusing on Russian meddling during the presidential campaign and on whether there was any coordination between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. Investigators have also been looking for any evidence of possible financial crimes among Trump's associates, officials said. Trump had received private assurances from then FBI Director James B. Comey starting in January that he was not personally under investigation. Officials say that changed shortly after Comey was fired. No kidding. Well, that's because everybody knows Comey is retaliating against Trump for being fired. He didn't want to be fired, and now he's acting like a sore loser as well. 5 people briefed on the request, speaking on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly, said Daniel Coates, the current director of national intelligence, Mike Rogers, who is the head of the National Security Agency, and Rogers' recently departed deputy Richard Leggett, agreed to be interviewed by Mueller's investigators as early as this week. The investigation has been cloaked in secrecy, and it is unclear how many others have been questioned by the FBI. The NSA said in a statement that it will fully cooperate with the special counsel and declined to comment further. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence and Leggett declined to comment. Now, Team Trump ties to Russia interests view graphic. As you can see that here. The White House now refers to all questions about the Russian investigation to Trump's personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz. Quote, "The FBI leak of information regarding the president is outrageous, inexcusable, and illegal," end quote, said Mark Carollo, a spokesman for Kasowitz. Well, we're all wondering, instead of Trump being investigated, why is Comey not being investigated for what he testified in Congress concerning his leak of information he had from meetings with Trump? And from what Trump says, there may have been many more leaks than just that one that Comey confessed to in the testimony of pertinent information and classified information of his meetings with the president. And he did it anonymously. The officials said Coates, Rogers, and Leggett would appear voluntarily, though it remains unclear whether they will describe in full their conversations with Trump and other top officials, or will be directed by the White House to invoke executive privilege. It is doubtful the White House could ultimately use executive privilege to try to block them from speaking to Mueller's investigators. Experts point out that the Supreme Court ruled during the Watergate scandal that officials cannot use privilege to withhold evidence in criminal prosecutions. The obstruction of justice investigation of the president began days after Comey was fired on May 9th. According to people familiar with the matter, Mueller's office has now taken up that work, and the preliminary interviews scheduled with intelligence officials indicate his team is actively pursuing potential witnesses inside and outside the government. The interviews suggest Mueller sees the question of attempted obstruction of justice as more than just a he said dispute between the president and the fired FBI director, an official said. Probing Trump for possible crimes is a complicated affair, even if convincing evidence of a crime were found. The Justice Department has long held that it would not be appropriate to indict a sitting president. Instead, experts say, the onus would be on Congress to review any findings of criminal misconduct and then decide whether to initiate impeachment proceedings. So this is where the Democrats are heading with all this. They really do want to impeach President Trump. Comey confirmed publicly in congressional testimony March 20th that the Bureau was investigating possible coordination between Trump campaign and the Russians. Comey's statement before the House Intelligence Committee upset Trump, who has repeatedly denied that any coordination with the Russians took place. Trump had wanted Comey to disclose publicly that he was not personally under investigation, but the FBI director refused to do so. Soon after, Trump spoke to Coates and Rogers about the Russia investigation. Officials said one of the exchanges of potential interest to Mueller took place on March 22nd, less than a week after Comey was confirmed by the Senate to serve as the nation's top intelligence official. Coates was attending a briefing at the White House with officials from several other government agencies. When the briefing ended, as the Washington Post previously reported, Trump asked everyone to leave the room except for Coates and CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Coates told associates that Trump had asked him whether Coates could intervene with Comey to get the Bureau to back off his focus on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn in its Russia probe, according to officials. Coates later told lawmakers that he never felt pressure to intervene. A day or two after the March 22nd meeting, Trump telephoned Coates and Rogers to separately ask them to issue public statements denying the existence of any evidence of coordination between his campaign and the Russian government. Coates and Rogers refused to comply with the president's request, officials say. It is unclear whether Leggett had direct contact with Trump or other top officials about the Russia probe, but he wrote an internal NSA memo documenting the president's phone call with Rogers, according to officials. As part of the probe, the special counsel also gathered Comey's written accounts of his conversations with Trump. The president has accused Comey of lying about those encounters. Mueller is overseeing a host of investigations involving people who are or were in Trump's orbit. People familiar with the probe said. The investigation is examining possible contacts with Russian operatives as well as any suspicious financial activity relating to those individuals. Last week, Comey told the Senate Intelligence Committee that he had informed Trump that there was no investigation of the president's personal conduct, at least while he was leading the FBI. Comey's careful worded comments and those of Andrew McCabe, who took over as acting FBI director, suggested to some officials that a probe of Trump for attempting obstruction may have been launched after Comey was fired. So the suggestion to probe Trump was after Comey's departure, particularly in light of Trump's alleged statements regarding Flynn. Comey testified last week, quote, "I took it as a very disturbing thing, very concerning, but that's a conclusion I'm sure the special counsel will work towards to try and understand what the intention was there and whether that's an offense," end quote. Mueller has not publicly discussed his work, and a spokesman for the special counsel declined to comment. Accounts by Comey and other officials of their conversations with the president could become a central piece of evidence if Mueller decides to pursue an obstruction case. Investigators will also look for any statements the president may have made publicly and privately to people outside the government about his reasons for firing Comey and his concern about the Russia probe and other related investigations, people familiar with matters said. Well, it turns out, of course, Trump was right in firing Comey. Comey was a leaker of privileged information. Comey said that on his testimony June 8th, on Thursday. He leaked anonymously through a Columbia Law School friend of his, a Columbia Law School professor. And he leaked anonymously to mainstream media. This is a crime. Comey testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee last week that he was certain his firing was due to the president's concern about the Russia probe rather than over his handling of the now closed FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server as Secretary of State, as the White House had initially asserted. Quote, "It's my judgment that I was fired because of the Russian investigation. I was fired in some way to change or to endeavor. The endeavor was to change the way the Russian investigation was being conducted." This is what Comey said. The fired FBI director said ultimately it was up to Mueller to make the determination whether the president crossed a legal line. Well, why is not the special prosecutor bringing in Comey investigating Comey for what he's done. He's perjured himself at least 10 times on June 8th. Even the Department of Justice called him a liar. In addition now, going back to this, in addition to describing his interactions with the president, Comey told the Intelligence Committee that while he was FBI director, he told Trump on 3 occasions that he was not under investigation as part of a counterintelligence probe looking at Russia meddling in the election. Republican lawmakers seized on Comey's testimony to point out that Trump was not in the FBI's crosshairs when Comey was leading the bureau. After Comey's testimony, in which he acknowledged telling Trump that he was not under investigation, Trump tweeted that he felt, quote, total and complete vindication, end quote. It is unclear whether McCabe, Comey's successor, has informed Trump of the change in the scope of the probe, though. This is on State of the Nation by Washington Post.